In Northern California's forgotten wine country, a divorced woman digging a well on her abandoned vineyard came face to face with $317 million in hidden treasure. Alice Perkins wasn't your typical newcomer. For 15 years, she had worked as a successful San Francisco interior designer, known for seeing potential in broken spaces. When she discovered the cursed Blackwood Estate's underground fortune, she had no idea she was walking into a century-old web of violence and greed. What began as her fresh start would become a deadly battle that forced her to choose between wealth and peace. The U-Haul's brake squealed as Alice Perkins guided it around the final curve of the dirt road. Dust billowed behind her, settling slowly in the late afternoon heat. Through the windshield, Blackwood Estate materialized like something from a fever dream, worse, somehow, than the grainy photos on the real estate listing had suggested. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Victorian manor house sagged at its center, as if the weight of decades had finally grown too heavy. Shutters hung at odd angles. The wraparound porch listed to one side, its railings missing entire sections like teeth knocked from a smile. Beyond the house, rows of gnarled vines stretched across the hillside, their leaves brown and curled, diseased. The property looked less like a vineyard and more like a graveyard for agricultural ambitions. Alice killed the engine. In the sudden silence, she could hear her own breathing, shallow, quick. Her hands remained on the steering wheel, knuckles white. What have I done? The question had become a refrain over the past 3 weeks, ever since she'd signed the purchase agreement in David Brennan's cramped office in Sonoma. The attorney had been professional, methodical, walking her through every clause while his eyes asked the question he was too polite to voice. Are you sure about this? She hadn't been sure. Still wasn't. But being unsure felt better than the suffocating certainty of her old life. The San Francisco townhouse that had never really been hers, the social circles where everyone knew about Marcus's affair before she did, the pitying glances at the farmer's market. Alice forced her hands to release the wheel. Her fingers ached. The property deed lay on the passenger seat, still crisp and official-looking despite being handled too many times. 42 acres of Northern California wine country. Blackwood Estate. The name carried weight in local history David had mentioned. The family that built it had been prominent once, before Prohibition, before scandal, before whatever curse the locals whispered about. She'd bought a curse. With the last $180,000 of her divorce settlement. Alice laughed. A short, bitter sound that died quickly in the truck's cabin. Marcus would love this. She could already imagine his smirk. The way he'd lean back in his ergonomic office chair and tell his new girlfriend about his ex-wife's little farming adventure. The phone in her pocket buzzed. She knew without looking it would be either her daughter Isabel or another spam call about her car's extended warranty. Neither felt manageable right now. She opened the door. Heat rolled over her like a physical thing. The air smelled of dry grass and something else. Rot, maybe, or just the particular scent of neglect. Her sneakers hit the dirt, and for a moment Alice stood there, one hand still on the door, looking at what she'd bought. The vineyard stretched before her, 42 acres of possibility or disaster. Probably disaster. A man materialized from between the rows of dying vines. Alice startled, her hand flying to her chest. He moved without sound, as if the earth itself had shaped him from soil and shadow. Older, 70s maybe, with weathered brown skin and silver hair tied back. He wore work clothes faded to no particular color and carried a pair of pruning shears that looked older than Alice. Tomas Vargas. His voice was quiet, accented. I'm the caretaker. Was told you'd be coming. Alice Perkins. She extended her hand. His grip was brief, calloused. I didn't know anyone was here. Been here 40 years. He looked past her at the house, his expression unreadable. Place needs work. It wasn't a question. Alice followed his gaze to the sagging structure, the broken windows, the roof that clearly leaked. I know. I'm planning to. She stopped. Planning to what? She had no idea what she was doing. Tomas studied her with dark eyes that seemed to see too much. You know the history? Why the last owners left. The listing said it had been abandoned since the early 30s. Abandoned. He said the word like it tasted wrong. That's one way to say it. His gaze drifted to the hills beyond the vineyard, to a section where the land dipped and rose again. Some land remembers what's buried in it. This land remembers. A chill ran down Alice's spine despite the heat. What does that mean? But Tomas was already turning away, moving back toward the vines with that same soundless walk. Water's been shut off for years. You'll need a new well. The old one ran dry in '85. He disappeared between the rows before Alice could respond. She stood alone in the driveway, the sun beginning its descent toward the western hills. The house loomed, and for a moment she considered getting back in the U-Haul and driving anywhere else. She had $3,000 left in her checking account. Maybe enough to start over somewhere with running water and walls that didn't lean. But where would she go? Back to San Francisco? To Isabel at college, becoming her daughter's burden? To her mother in Arizona, who'd told her the divorce was her own fault for letting herself go? No, this was it. This broken-down estate in the middle of nowhere. Her last chance to prove to Marcus, to Isabel, to herself, that she was more than the woman who'd been left. Alice grabbed her overnight bag from the truck and walked toward the house. The front door stuck, swollen in its frame. She had to shoulder it open, and it gave way with a groan that echoed through empty rooms. Inside smelled of dust and mouse droppings and old wood. The foyer stretched ahead, its hardwood floors scratched and stained. A grand staircase rose to the second floor, its banister missing spindles. To her left, a parlor. To her right, what might have been a dining room. Straight ahead, presumably the kitchen. Alice dropped her bag and walked through the ground floor, cataloging the damage. Wallpaper peeling in long strips, plaster cracked and fallen. Windows so dirty they barely let in light. In the kitchen, an ancient stove sat rusted. The sink was dry when she turned the tap, just as Tomas had warned. No running water. No electricity, she discovered, flipping switches that did nothing. The realtor had mentioned the utilities were disconnected. She'd need to call the power company, arrange for reconnection, figure out the water situation. One thing at a time. That's what her therapist had said during the divorce. When everything feels overwhelming, just do the next right thing. Alice returned to the U-Haul and began unloading. A camping lantern, a sleeping bag, bottled water and protein bars, a box of cleaning supplies that now seemed laughably inadequate. She'd rented the storage unit in Sonoma for everything else. Her furniture, her design portfolio, the remnants of her old life. This truck held only what she'd need for the first few nights. By the time she'd set up her sleeping bag in the least damaged bedroom upstairs, the sun was setting. Golden light streamed through the filthy windows, illuminating dust motes that danced and swirled. Alice sat on the floor with her back against the wall and looked around the empty room. A Victorian manor in wine country. Once, this would have seemed romantic, the kind of project she'd have sketched out on graph paper, planned room by room, color by color. She'd been good at her work. Interior design for wealthy clients who trusted her eye, her sense of how spaces should flow and feel. That felt like another lifetime. Another Alice. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked. Isabel. She answered. Hi, honey. Mom? Did you make it? Her daughter's voice carried worry wrapped in forced brightness. I'm here. Safe. And? How is it? Alice looked at the cracked plaster, the water-stained ceiling, the window that wouldn't fully close. It's got potential. Mom. Isabel knew her too well. Tell me the truth. It's worse than the photos. But I expected that. Had she? Or had she just needed to believe something could be salvaged? I'll make it work, Izzy. Promise. Silence on the line. Then, Dad called me. Of course he had. Alice closed her eyes. What did he say? That you made an impulsive decision. That you bought this place without even visiting first. That he's worried about you. Isabel paused. He's not wrong about the impulsive part. No, he's not. But I told him you're tougher than he ever gave you credit for. Her daughter's voice strengthened. "You are, right? Tough enough for this?" Alice wasn't sure, but she heard herself say, "Yes." They talked for a few more minutes, about Isabel's classes, her roommate's boyfriend drama, anything except the divorce or Marcus or the crumbling house Alice sat in. When they hung up, the silence felt heavier. The lantern cast shadows that made the room feel larger, emptier. Alice pulled out the protein bar she'd been saving and forced herself to eat it, though it tasted like cardboard. As darkness fell completely, she explored the room more carefully, opening drawers in the built-in dresser. In the bottom drawer, she found them photographs. Old ones, sepia-toned, curled at the edges. A family on the front porch of this very house, but in its glory days. The father stood tall in a suit, his hand on the shoulder of a woman in a white dress. 3 children arranged in front, the oldest, a boy of maybe 16, looking directly at the camera with serious eyes. On the back, in faded ink, Blackwood family, 1924. Alice studied their faces. They looked prosperous, confident. The house behind them was pristine, the porch straight, the gardens visible at the frame's edge manicured and lush. What had happened to them? Why had they left this place to rot? Some land remembers what's buried in it. Tomas's words came back to her, and Alice shivered. She tucked the photographs back into the drawer and zipped herself into the sleeping bag. Through the broken window, she could hear night sounds, crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, wind through the diseased vines. Her phone lit up with a text. Marcus. She shouldn't look, but her thumb moved of its own accord. Heard you made it to your little farming adventure. Good luck with that. You'll need it. The words were designed to cut, to make her doubt. They worked. Alice felt the old familiar tightening in her chest. The voice that said she wasn't capable, wasn't strong enough, would fail at this just like she'd failed at keeping her marriage together. But then something shifted. Maybe it was the darkness, or the photograph of the Blackwood family in better days, or the simple fact that she'd driven 6 hours and unloaded a truck and survived the first night. Whatever it was, Alice felt something harden inside her. Not quite anger, not quite determination, but some alloy of both. She typed back, "Thanks. I will make this work." Then she blocked his number. The action felt both petty and powerful. Marcus could still reach her through Isabel if there was a real emergency. But she didn't need his mocking texts, his subtle undermining, his presence in her phone at all hours reminding her what she'd lost. She needed water, a functioning well. That was the practical problem, the one she could actually solve. Everything else, the house, the vines, the whispers of curses and buried secrets, could wait. But without water, none of it mattered. Alice pulled out the small notebook she'd bought and started making a list in the lantern light. Call David about well-digging permits. Get recommendations for contractors. Budget for drilling. The numbers wouldn't be good. She knew that, but writing them down made them feel manageable. Real problems with real solutions, not just the overwhelming weight of having bet everything on 42 acres of cursed land. Outside, the wind picked up. The house creaked and settled around her. Somewhere downstairs, something, probably a loose shutter, banged rhythmically against the siding. Alice turned off the lantern and lay in the darkness, listening to her new home make its strange night music. Tomorrow she'd start calling contractors. She'd figure out the water situation. She'd clean one room until it felt livable. She'd do the next right thing, and then the next until this place either became a home or proved her ex-husband right. But tonight, in the broken house on the cursed vineyard, Alice Perkins closed her eyes and let herself feel the terrifying freedom of having nothing left to lose. The drill bit screamed as it punched through rock 20 feet down. Alice stood at the edge of the excavation site, arms crossed against the morning chill, watching the crew work. 3 weeks had passed since that first night in the house. 3 weeks of contractors, permit applications, and watching her remaining funds evaporate with terrifying speed. Mrs. Perkins? The foreman, a stocky man named Rodriguez, killed the drill's engine. The sudden silence felt oppressive. We've hit something. Alice's stomach dropped. What kind of something? Hollow space. Big one, feels like. He wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool air. Could be a cavity in the rock. Could be a problem. She moved closer to the drill rig, peering down into the narrow shaft they'd been boring. How big a problem? Rodriguez exchanged glances with his crew. Won't know until we investigate. Might compromise the well's integrity. Might be nothing. He paused. You want us to widen the opening? Check it out? Alice did the math in her head. Every additional hour cost money she didn't have. But drilling a well that might collapse seemed worse. Do it. 2 hours later, the opening was wide enough for a person. Rodriguez lowered a work light on a cable, and Alice watched it descend into darkness. The light revealed rough stone walls, then disappeared into a space larger than the beam could illuminate. That's not a cavity, Rodriguez said quietly. That's a cave. Tomas appeared at Alice's elbow, so suddenly she jumped. He'd been doing that, materializing without warning, watching the work with those dark, knowing eyes. Now he stared down into the opening, his weathered face unreadable. You knew, Alice said. Not a question. Heard stories. Never went looking. His voice carried something Alice couldn't name. Warning, maybe, or fear. Some things stay buried for a reason. What things? But Tomas was already walking away, his silence more unsettling than any answer. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, if you want to go down there, I can lower you on the harness. But I'm not liable if... I'll sign whatever you need. Alice was already moving toward the equipment shed where they'd stored the safety harnesses. Her hands shook as she buckled the straps, but her mind felt strangely clear. This was her property. Whatever was down there, she needed to know. The descent took less than a minute but felt longer. The temperature dropped as Alice lowered into the earth, the work light swinging above her, casting wild shadows on stone walls that showed tool marks. Human-made, deliberate. This wasn't a natural cave system. Her feet touched solid ground. Alice unclipped from the harness and grabbed the flashlight Rodriguez had tossed down. The beam cut through darkness, revealing a chamber that stretched beyond her light's reach. Then she saw them. Wine racks. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Carefully constructed wooden frames stretching into the darkness, holding bottles so thick with dust they looked like artifacts from an archaeological dig. Alice moved closer, her breath coming fast. The bottles were old, the glass thick and hand-blown, the labels faded to illegibility in most cases. But some she could read. Chateau Margaux. Romanicanti. Names she recognized from her old life, from dinner parties where Marcus had shown off his modest wine collection. These weren't modest. These were legendary. Her flashlight beam swept further into the chamber and caught something else. A leather satchel, sitting on a small wooden table as if someone had just set it down. Alice approached slowly, half expecting it to crumble when she touched it. But the leather, though dry and cracked, held together. Inside, documents, letters written in fading ink, a ledger with columns of numbers and names, and on top, a letter addressed to no one, dated October 1929. If you're reading this, I'm dead. What I've hidden here belongs to no one and everyone. I stole it to save my family. I hid it to keep them alive. Let it stay buried. The wine isn't worth the blood already spilled. The signature was illegible, but Alice didn't need to read it. She knew whose handwriting this was, the same hand that had written on the back of those photographs upstairs. Nathaniel Blackwood. Mrs. Perkins? You okay down there? Rodriguez's voice echoed from above. Alice looked around the chamber, her mind trying to process what she was seeing. This wasn't just a wine collection. This was a fortune, hidden for nearly a century, under her property. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm fine, she called up, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm coming up. She grabbed the satchel and clipped back into the harness. As Rodriguez hauled her toward the surface, Alice clutched the leather bag to her chest and tried to think. What was she supposed to do with this? Report it? To who? The police? The IRS? Her mind spun through possibilities, each more complicated than the last. She emerged into daylight, blinking. The crew stared at her, at the satchel, questions written on their faces. "What's down there?" Rodriguez asked. "Old wine." It wasn't a lie exactly. From Prohibition, looks like. The original owners must have hidden it. The workers exchanged glances. Alice could see the calculation happening. How much might old wine be worth? Would there be a finder's fee? Rodriguez opened his mouth, probably to ask those exact questions. "I need to call my attorney," Alice said quickly, "before we do anything else. No one goes down there until I sort out the legal situation." She met Rodriguez's eyes. Understood. He nodded slowly, but Alice could see she'd made a mistake. She should have kept quiet, pretended there was nothing down there, sent them home and come back alone. Now they knew. And knowledge, Alice was learning, had a way of spreading. Tomas stood at the edge of the vineyard, watching. When their eyes met, he shook his head slowly. Not in negation, but in something like resignation. Or pity. Alice climbed into her truck with the satchel and drove toward the main house, her hands gripping the wheel too tight. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to David Brennan's number. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she even say? "I found a cave full of priceless wine under my vineyard?" It sounded insane. But the satchel sat heavy on the passenger seat, real and solid and undeniable. She pressed call. David answered on the second ring. "Alice? Everything okay? I need you to come to the estate. Now, if possible." Her voice cracked slightly. "I found something." "What kind of something?" Alice looked at the satchel, at the house, at the crew still gathered around the excavation site. "The kind that's going to complicate everything." There was a pause. Then David's voice, careful and measured. "I'm 40 minutes away. Don't touch anything else. Don't tell anyone else. I'll be there as soon as I can." The line went dead. Alice sat in her truck, engine running, staring at nothing. Through the rearview mirror, she could see Rodriguez on his phone, making a call, probably to his wife, his brother, someone he trusted. By tomorrow, half the valley would know that something had been found at Blackwood Estate. The satchel seemed to pulse with significance on the seat beside her. Alice opened it again, pulled out the ledger. The numbers were staggering: hundreds of bottles, provenance notes, purchase prices from the 1920s. If even half of these bottles were real, if they'd survived in drinkable condition. She didn't know enough about wine to estimate the value, but she knew it would be significant, life-changing, the kind of money that attracted attention, the kind that made people do desperate things. Some land remembers what's buried in it. Tomas had tried to warn her, but what choice did she have now? She'd found it. The crew had seen her go down, had seen her come up with the satchel. There was no unfinding it, no pretending the cave didn't exist. Alice looked up at the Victorian house, sagging and broken. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her escape from Marcus, from San Francisco, from a life that had imploded. Instead, she'd bought 42 acres of complications she couldn't begin to understand. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard you found something interesting. People will pay good money for information about finds like that. Think about it." Alice's blood went cold. How did anyone know already? Rodriguez must have made more than one call. She deleted the text and locked her phone. Then she got out of the truck and walked toward the house, the satchel under her arm, David Brennan 40 minutes away, and the certain knowledge that her quiet, fresh start had just become something else entirely. In the distance, Tomas watched from the vineyard. He'd seen this before, Alice realized. Not this exactly, but something like it. The land remembering, the past refusing to stay buried. And now it was her problem to solve. David Brennan arrived in 37 minutes, his sedan kicking up dust as it pulled alongside Alice's truck. He emerged carrying a leather briefcase, his tie loosened, hair slightly disheveled in a way that suggested he'd been running his hands through it during the drive. "Show me," he said without preamble. Alice led him through the house to the kitchen table where she'd spread out the contents of the satchel. The ledger lay open, its pages covered in meticulous handwriting. Letters were arranged chronologically. The final note from Nathaniel Blackwood sat on top. David read in silence, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he looked up at Alice with an expression somewhere between concern and disbelief. "You're telling me there's a cave full of pre-prohibition wine under your property?" "That's what I'm telling you. And your drill crew knows about it. Rodriguez and 2 workers. Plus Tomas, though I think he already knew something was down there." Alice rubbed her temples. "I got a text 20 minutes after I came up. Someone asking if I wanted to sell information about what I'd found." David's eyes narrowed. "Show me." She pulled up the deleted message from her phone's recently deleted folder. David photographed it with his own phone, his expression darkening. "This moves fast in wine country," he said quietly. "Rumors, speculation, people with money looking for the next big score." He gathered the documents carefully, placing them back in the satchel. "We need an expert. Someone who can authenticate what's down there and give us a real valuation. Someone discreet. Do you know anyone?" "I might." David pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts. "Dr. Raymond Ashford. He's a wine historian, specializes in pre-prohibition California vintages. Considered the best in authentication." He paused. "He's also a little obsessive and socially difficult. But if anyone can tell us what you've found, it's him. Call him." David stepped outside to make the call. Through the kitchen window, Alice watched him pace, his free hand gesturing as he spoke. She returned to the ledger, studying the entries more carefully now. The names of wines she recognized, even with her limited knowledge. Chateau d'Yquem, Petrus, but also California wineries she'd never heard of. Estates that must have disappeared during Prohibition, their legacy reduced to dusty bottles in an underground chamber. David returned. "He'll be here tomorrow morning. Early. He's driving up from Berkeley tonight." A pause. "Alice, he's going to want to see the collection. All of it. And once he does, word will spread even faster." "I know." She met his eyes. "What are my legal obligations here? Do I have to report this?" David set his briefcase on the table, opened it, pulled out a legal pad. "Technically, treasure trove law in California is murky. If the wine was abandoned, you could argue finder's rights. But if there are living descendants of the Blackwood family, they might have a claim. And if any of the wine was stolen, which this ledger suggests it might have been, that opens another set of complications. So basically, I'm about to be sued by everyone." "Possibly." David's voice softened. "But let's take this one step at a time. First, we authenticate. Then we assess value. Then we figure out who has legitimate claims." He hesitated. "There's something else you should know. If this collection is as significant as these documents suggest, it won't just be descendants making claims. Wine collectors, museums, the state of California, everyone will want a piece." Alice felt the walls closing in. "I just wanted to dig a well." "I know." David reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly before he pulled back, professional boundaries reasserting themselves. "We'll figure this out. That's what I'm here for." That night, Alice couldn't sleep. She lay in her sleeping bag, listening to the house settle, thinking about the fortune buried beneath her feet. Around midnight, her phone rang. "Isabel." "Mom? I saw something online. A post in a wine forum about Blackwood Estate. Someone saying there's been unusual activity there." Her daughter's voice carried worry. "What's going on?" Alice considered lying, softening the truth. But Isabel deserved better. "I found something when we were drilling the well. Why, a lot of it. From before Prohibition." Silence on the line. Then, "How much wine?" "I don't know yet. An expert is coming tomorrow to look at it." "Mom." Isabel's voice sharpened. "This sounds dangerous. People kill over stuff like this." "It's just old wine, honey. It's money. And money makes people do terrible things." A pause. "Dad's money made him terrible. Don't let this money do the same to you." After they hung up, Alice sat in the darkness, her daughter's words echoing. She thought about Marcus, about how his success had slowly transformed him from the ambitious but kind man she'd married into someone who valued deals over people, wins over relationships. Would this fortune do that to her? Was she already changing, calculating value instead of focusing on the simple dream of rebuilding a vineyard? Dr. Raymond Ashford arrived at 6:30 the next morning, driving a vintage Volvo that had seen better days. He emerged looking exactly as David had described, mid-50s, rumpled tweed jacket despite the California heat, wire-rimmed glasses that he pushed up his nose every few seconds. He carried a worn leather bag that clinked with the sound of glass instruments. Mrs. Perkins. His handshake was brief, distracted. His eyes had already moved past her to the house, the vineyard, the excavation site visible in the distance. Where is it? No pleasantries. No small talk. Alice liked him immediately. She led him to the cave entrance, now widened enough for easy access. Raymond's hands trembled as he clipped into the harness. Not from fear, Alice realized. From anticipation. The descent took minutes. Alice went down first, followed by Raymond, then David. In the cave chamber, with work lights now set up by Rodriguez's crew, the full scope of the collection became visible. Rows upon rows of wine racks stretching back into the darkness. Thousands of bottles. Raymond made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. He approached the nearest rack like someone approaching an altar, his fingers hovering over a bottle without quite touching it. Inglenook, 1906. His voice shook. This shouldn't exist. The vineyard's records show this vintage was completely destroyed in the 1907 fire. He moved to the next bottle. Schramsberg, 1911. Beaulieu, 1917. His hand went to his chest. Dear God, this is impossible. Is it real? Alice asked. Raymond turned to her, his eyes bright behind his glasses. Real? Mrs. Perkins, this is the most significant wine discovery in American history. These are ghosts. Wines that were supposed to be lost. Legends that collectors have searched for decades. He pulled out a jeweler's loupe, examining a label more closely. If even 10% of these bottles are authentic and properly preserved, you're looking at. He trailed off, pulling out a small notebook and beginning to scribble calculations. Alice and David exchanged glances while Raymond worked, muttering to himself, moving from rack to rack with increasing excitement. An hour passed, then two. Raymond photographed labels, took notes, occasionally removing a bottle with gloved hands to examine the fill level, the cork condition, the sediment. He worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd found exactly what they'd spent their entire life searching for. Finally, he returned to where Alice and David stood near the entrance. His face was flushed, his hands still trembling. Preliminary assessment, understand. I'll need weeks to properly catalog and authenticate everything. He paused, pushing his glasses up. But based on what I've seen, conservative estimate, you're looking at $300 million. Possibly more. The number hung in the air like something physical. Alice felt dizzy. 300 million, she repeated. At minimum. If the provenance holds up, if the wines are properly stored and drinkable, if we can verify the more exceptional bottles. Raymond's voice took on a dreamy quality. Mrs. Perkins, this collection represents a time capsule of American winemaking before Prohibition destroyed it. These aren't just bottles. They're history. David's hand found Alice's elbow, steadying her. We need to secure this immediately. Professional security, insurance, legal protection. But Raymond was already back among the racks, his notebook out, lost in his work. Alice watched him handle each bottle with reverence, and something cold settled in her stomach. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about obsession, about desire, about people who would do anything to possess what she'd accidentally found. They emerged from the cave as the sun climbed higher. Sophie Martinez was waiting by Alice's truck, her arms crossed, her expression serious. We need to talk, Sophie said without preamble. The whole valley's buzzing about what you found, and there are people you need to be very careful of. Alice looked from Sophie to David to the cave entrance where Raymond was still working below. The vineyard stretched around them, The diseased vines a reminder of why she'd come here in the first place. To start over. To find peace. Instead, she'd found 300 million reasons why peace might be impossible. Sophie Martinez didn't wait for an invitation. She climbed into Alice's truck, shutting the door firmly behind her. Drive. Away from here. We need to talk privately. Alice glanced at David, who nodded. She started the engine and headed down the dirt road towards Sophie's adjacent vineyard. In the rearview mirror, she could see Raymond's Volvo still parked by the excavation site, the historian presumably still cataloging his discovery. $300 million, Sophie said flatly. That's what people are saying. Word travels fast. This is wine country. Everyone knows everyone's business. Sophie's voice was tight. And everyone knows what $300 million does to people. I've already had 2 calls this morning. Collectors asking if I know how to reach you, offering finder's fees if I can arrange introductions. Alice's hands tightened on the wheel. What did you tell them? That you're not interested. But Alice, they won't stop. This is just the beginning. Sophie turned to face her. My grandfather worked at Blackwood Estate. During Prohibition. He never talked about it, but my grandmother told me stories before she died. There was violence here. Men died over that wine. The Blackwood family didn't just leave, they fled. And whatever Nathaniel Blackwood hid down there, people killed for it once. They'll kill for it again. The truck bumped over a pothole. Alice's phone, sitting in the cup holder, buzzed continuously. She didn't look at it. I'm trying to do the right thing, Alice said quietly. I'm bringing in experts, working with David to understand the legal situation. I'm not trying to steal anything from anyone. I know, but right doesn't matter when this much money is involved. Sophie's expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to prepare you, because what's coming next is going to test everything you think you know about yourself. They pulled up to Sophie's tasting room, a converted barn with solar panels and a hand-painted sign. Before Alice could respond, her phone rang. David's number. Alice, you need to come back. Now. His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Alice's stomach dropped. What happened? Just come back. Fast. The drive back took 5 minutes that felt like 30. When Alice pulled up to Blackwood Estate, 3 vehicles she didn't recognize were parked in her driveway. A news van sat on the road, a camera operator filming the property from the shoulder. David met her at the truck, his jaw set. Marcus's lawyers are here, and you have another visitor. Vivian Blackwood Torres. Who? Nathaniel Blackwood's granddaughter. She drove down from Oregon overnight when she heard the news. David lowered his voice. Alice, she has documentation. Family trees, estate records, letters. She's claiming the wine belongs to her family. Inside the house, 3 people waited in what Alice had cleaned up as a makeshift sitting room. 2 men in expensive suits, Marcus's lawyers clearly, stood near the window. A woman sat in the one chair Alice owned, her posture ramrod straight despite her age. She had to be in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that assessed Alice with sharp intelligence. Mrs. Perkins. The woman stood, extending her hand. Vivian Blackwood Torres. I believe we need to talk about my family's property. One of the lawyers stepped forward. Mrs. Perkins, I'm James Chun, representing Marcus Hartwell. We're here to inform you that our client has filed a claim against any assets discovered on this property, as the purchase was made using marital settlement funds. The settlement was finalized. Alice interrupted. The money was mine. Subject to dispute. Our client maintains that your client can maintain whatever he wants. David's voice cut through the room like a blade. Any claims will go through proper legal channels. This ambush is inappropriate and you know it. The second lawyer opened his mouth to respond, but Vivian spoke first. Gentlemen, perhaps we could all benefit from civility. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to commanding classrooms. Mrs. Perkins, may I show you something? She reached into a worn leather portfolio and withdrew a stack of photographs and documents. The first photo showed the Blackwood family, the same image Alice had found upstairs, but in better condition. Vivian pointed to the young boy. My father. He was 16 when they lost everything. When his father, my grandfather Nathaniel, died under mysterious circumstances in 1930, the family was destroyed. Scandal, debts, whispers of criminality. They lost the estate, lost their name. My father spent his whole life trying to restore what was taken from us. She laid out more documents. Birth certificates, estate records, a family tree carefully maintained across generations. I've spent 40 years researching what happened here. I knew about the wine, the stories passed down through my family. I've been trying to find proof to restore our legacy. Her hand shook slightly as she placed the final document on the table. A faded letter in Nathaniel Blackwood's handwriting. My grandfather didn't steal that wine for profit. He was protecting it. Protecting his family from dangerous men who would have killed them all for it. Vivian's eyes met Alice's. I'm not here to take anything from you, but that collection represents my family's honor, my heritage, and I have a son, Michael, who has medical needs I can barely afford to meet. The room fell silent. Alice looked from Vivian's dignified desperation to Marcus's lawyer's calculating expressions to David's carefully neutral face. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Representative from California State Treasury. We need to discuss your discovery. Potential cheat situation. Call immediately. How many claims? Alice asked David quietly. So far? 3. Marcus, Mrs. Blackwood Torres, and now apparently the state. He paused. There will be more. Alice looked at Vivian, at the photographs of the Blackwood family in their glory days, at the pain in the older woman's eyes. Then she looked at the lawyers, at their expensive suits and calculated moves on Marcus's behalf. I need everyone to leave, Alice said. Now. I need time to think. Mrs. Perkins, we really must insist. The first lawyer began. Out. David's voice was steel. You've delivered your notice. The rest goes through proper channels. As the lawyers left, muttering about procedures and deadlines, Vivian remained seated. She looked at Alice with an expression that combined hope and resignation. I'm not your enemy, Mrs. Perkins. Whatever you decide, I just want you to know the truth. Those bottles represent my family's last chance at dignity, at legacy. She stood slowly. I'll be staying at the Sonoma Inn if you want to talk. About history. About what really happened here in 1929. About the bodies that were never found. Then she was gone, leaving Alice and David alone in the deteriorating house while outside. The news camera kept filming and her phone kept buzzing with calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Alice woke to knocking at dawn. She'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table, her head resting on Vivian's photographs. The knocking came again, firm and persistent. Through the window, she saw a man on her porch. 50s, weathered face, wearing jeans and a leather jacket despite the morning chill. He didn't look like a lawyer. She opened the door a crack. Can I help you? Jackson Reeves. People call me Jack. His voice was gravelly, direct. I'm a private investigator. I've been hired to locate and authenticate the Blackwood collection. Heard you beat me to it. Alice's hand tightened on the doorframe. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling. I'm not selling anything. I'm warning you. Jack's eyes were hard but not unkind. My clients, wine collectors, serious money, they thought the Blackwood cash was a myth. Now they know it's real. And they're not the only dangerous people who've heard about your discovery. Dangerous? Mrs. Perkins, I've worked asset recovery for 20 years. I've seen what people do for a fraction of what you've found. He pulled out a business card, held it between two fingers. I'm telling you this because you seem like someone who got in over their head by accident. Be very careful who you trust. And if you need information about who's circling, call me. He left the card wedged in the doorframe and walked back to a nondescript sedan parked down the road. Alice was still staring after him when another car pulled up. This one was different, a black Mercedes, immaculate, expensive. The man who emerged wore a suit that probably cost more than Alice's truck. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. Mrs. Perkins? His smile was warm, practiced. Gabriel Santoro. I apologize for the early hour, but I wanted to speak with you before things become too complicated. Everything about him screamed wealth and control. Alice felt immediately uncomfortable. I'm a collector, Gabriel continued, approaching the porch with measured steps. I've spent 30 years building what many consider the finest private wine collection in North America. When I heard about your discovery, I knew I had to meet you personally. I'm not selling. Of course not. Not the entire collection. His smile never wavered. But perhaps select bottles? I would pay premium prices naturally, far above market value. And I could provide assistance with the legal complications I'm sure you're facing. Alice thought of Jack's warning minutes earlier. Thank you, but no. For just a moment, something cold flickered behind Gabriel's eyes. Then the smile returned, brighter than before. I understand. This is overwhelming. But please take my card. He produced it from an inner pocket, heavy stock, embossed. When you're ready to discuss this seriously, call me. These bottles deserve proper care, Mrs. Perkins. Proper homes. I can provide that. He returned to his Mercedes and drove away slowly, as if making sure Alice watched him leave. She was still standing on the porch when Sophie's truck pulled up, followed immediately by David's sedan. They both emerged looking grim. Gabriel Santoro was just here, Alice said before either could speak. Sophie's face darkened. What did he want? To buy bottles. To help with my legal problems. Did you agree to anything? No. Sophie exhaled relief. Good. Because Gabriel Santoro doesn't help people. He collects them, like his wines. David climbed the porch steps, his briefcase in hand. We need to talk about security. Professional security. I've made some calls. My grandfather knew Gabriel's father, Sophie interrupted. Back during Prohibition, the Santoro family ran wine through the valley, sold it to speakeasies in San Francisco. They were connected to people who made other collectors disappear. She met Alice's eyes. My grandfather told my grandmother that 3 men died here in 1929. Shot. Over the wine Nathaniel Blackwood was hiding. The Santoros were involved. The morning suddenly felt colder. Alice thought of Vivian's words. About the bodies that were never found. You're saying there are bodies buried on my property? I'm saying people died for what you found. And history has a way of repeating itself. Alice's phone rang. Tomas. She'd never seen him call before. He usually just appeared when needed. There are cameras, he said without greeting. On the property perimeter. Professional ones. Someone is watching the estate. David was already moving, his phone out, calling someone. Sophie stood close to Alice, her presence protective. This is escalating too fast, Alice said quietly. It'll get worse before it gets better, Sophie replied. The question is whether you're ready for what comes next. The security cameras weren't the only problem. By noon, Alice had counted 4 different vehicles positioned on the road with clear sight lines to the estate. David's security consultant, a former police officer named Maria Santos, walked the property perimeter with a handheld RF detector, finding 3 more cameras and 2 audio bugs. Professional grade, Maria said, bagging the devices. Whoever planted these knew what they were doing. They've been watching for at least 48 hours, maybe longer. Alice stood in the kitchen with David, watching through the window as Maria worked. Her hands shook slightly as she poured coffee. We need to move the wine. The most valuable bottles, at least. Get them somewhere secure. Agreed. I've arranged for a climate-controlled facility in Napa. Bonded, insured, professional security. David pulled out his tablet, showing her specifications. But there's a problem. To ensure the collection, we need a complete official inventory. That means declaring the value, which triggers tax implications and makes the discovery part of public record. So either I leave $300 million in a cave under minimal security, or I expose myself to every treasure hunter and tax collector in California. Essentially, yes. Alice set down her coffee cup too hard, and it cracked. She stared at the spreading brown stain on the table. When does this get easier? It doesn't. It just gets different. David's voice was gentle. But we'll figure it out. One step at a time. The sound of an approaching vehicle made them both turn. Raymond Ashford's Volvo pulled up, and the historian emerged looking agitated. He hurried to the door, barely waiting for Alice to open it. "Mrs. Perkins, I need to speak with you. Privately." His eyes darted to David. Legal privilege doesn't extend to authentication consultants. David's expression hardened. "What's this about, Raymond?" "I said privately. Anything you need to tell Alice, you can say in front of her attorney." Raymond's jaw worked. He looked trapped, cornered. Finally, he pulled out his phone, opened an email, and handed it to Alice. The message was from an address she didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Opportunity. Dr. Ashford, we understand you're authenticating the Blackwood collection. We're prepared to offer $100,000 for detailed photographs of labels, provenance information, and your professional assessment. Discretion assured. Payment in cryptocurrency, untraceable." Alice looked up at Raymond. "When did you receive this?" "Yesterday afternoon, after I left here." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "It's not the only one. I've received 3 similar offers. The amounts keep increasing. And you're telling me this because I need you to understand what's happening. The wine collecting world is small, wealthy, and absolutely ruthless. Word is spreading that you have bottles people have been searching for their entire lives. Collectors who've spent millions building their cellars, and you have the pieces they need to complete them." Raymond finally looked at her directly. "I'm being offered money just for information. Can you imagine what they're willing to pay or do for the actual bottles?" David took the phone, photographing the email. "Who else knows the full extent of what's down there?" "Just me. And whatever I've documented is in my encrypted notes." Raymond paused. "But Mrs. Perkins, I'm not the only expert people could hire. And I'm probably not the only one being approached. You need to move this collection to secure storage. Today." 3 hours later, a specialized wine transportation service arrived. A climate-controlled truck with security escorts. Raymond supervised as workers carefully removed the most valuable bottles from the cave. The pre-Prohibition California vintages, the legendary French wines, anything he deemed irreplaceable. Alice watched from the surface as crate after crate emerged. Each one represented more money than she'd made in a year as an interior designer. The numbers had stopped feeling real. Maria Santos appeared at her elbow. "The transport company is legitimate. I vetted them. But you should know. I saw one of the surveillance vehicles photographing the truck's license plate." Of course they did. Alice felt exhaustion settling into her bones. This was supposed to be a fresh start. Instead, it felt like trading one trap for another. Her phone rang. "Isabel." Alice answered, stepping away from the activity. "Mom, have you seen social media?" Her daughter's voice was tight with anger and fear. "I've been a little busy. There are posts about you. On Twitter, Instagram, wine forums. People saying you stole a fortune, that you're hiding it, that you don't deserve it. And Mom," Isabel's voice cracked. "Someone posted a picture of our old house in San Francisco, with the address, saying that's where your daughter lives." Alice's blood went cold. "You're at school. You're safe." "I'm scared." Someone commented on my Instagram, asking if I knew how much the wine was worth, if I could get them access to you. A pause. Dad called. He said this is what happens when you get greedy, that I should come home to his place where I'd be safe. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it weren't terrifying. "Isabel, listen to me. Your father is using this situation to control both of us. Don't go to his place. Stay at school, stay with friends, but don't." A car pulled into the driveway. Not a surveillance vehicle. A BMW that Alice recognized immediately. "Marcus." "He's here," Alice said. "I have to go." "Mom, don't let him." "I won't. I love you. We'll talk tonight." Alice hung up and walked toward the BMW, her jaw set. Marcus emerged looking like he'd stepped out of a board meeting. Tailored suit, expensive watch, that smile that had once made her feel chosen and now just made her feel sick. Alice, you're looking, well, stressed. His eyes took in the transport truck, the workers, the obvious security presence. Quite an operation you've got here. What do you want, Marcus? To talk. About our daughter. About this situation you've created that's putting her at risk. David was already moving toward them, but Alice held up a hand, stopping him. This was hers to handle. I didn't create this situation. I found something on property I legally own. Property you bought with marital assets. The settlement was final. The money was mine. Your lawyers know it, which is why they're trying intimidation instead of actual legal action. Marcus's smile tightened. Be reasonable. You're in over your head. Let me help. We can work together on this. Split the proceeds, make sure Isabel is provided for. You mean make sure you get half of something you had nothing to do with finding? I mean protect our daughter from the shitstorm you've brought down on this family. His voice hardened. People are threatening her, Alice, posting her address online. And why? Because her mother got greedy. The accusation landed like a slap. For a moment, Alice felt the old familiar doubt creeping in. The sense that maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she had been selfish, maybe she should just... Then Isabel's truck pulled into the driveway. Alice's heart stopped. Her daughter emerged, her face pale but determined, a duffel bag over her shoulder. Isabel, what are you doing here? Alice asked. I drove up. I'm not staying at school while you deal with this alone. Isabel turned to her father, and her expression was pure fury. And I'm definitely not hiding at your place while you pretend to care about my safety. Isabel, be reasonable. Reasonable? You're using death threats against me as leverage to steal from Mom. That's not reasonable. That's sick. Isabel's voice rose. You cheated on her. You tried to take everything in the divorce. You've spent 2 years making her feel like she was worthless. And now that she's found something valuable, you want half of it? Marcus's mask slipped. Watch your tone. No. I'm done watching anything. I'm done pretending you're the victim here. I'm done letting you manipulate both of us. Isabel moved to stand beside Alice. Mom made a mistake trusting you for 15 years, but she's not making that mistake again. And neither am I. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus looked between them, calculations visible behind his eyes. Finally, he smiled cold, sharp. Fine. Handle this on your own. But when it all falls apart, when you're dealing with lawsuits and creditors and people who want to take everything you found, don't come crying to me. He got back in his BMW. You've always been stubborn, Alice. It's going to destroy you. He drove away, kicking up dust. Alice stood with her daughter, both of them shaking. You shouldn't have come, Alice said quietly. Yes, I should have. Isabel dropped her bag. Is it true? About the fortune? It's true. And are you going to keep it? Fight for it? Alice looked at the transport truck being loaded with bottles worth millions, at David coordinating with Maria Santos, at Raymond obsessively checking each crate's climate controls. She thought about Vivian's dignified desperation, about Gabriel Santoro's cold eyes, about Jack Reeves's warning. I don't know, she admitted. I don't know if it's worth the cost. Isabel hugged her fiercely. Then we'll figure it out. Together. Alice's phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. I have documents that might help resolve the ownership question. Can we meet? Away from the estate. I'll come to you. Another text, this one from an unknown number. Your security consultant is good. But no one is that good. The wine will be ours. This is your only warning. Alice looked at her daughter, at the chaos surrounding them, at the fortune being loaded into trucks while strangers watched from the road. She'd wanted a fresh start. Instead, she'd found something that was tearing her life apart in entirely new ways. But at least this time she had Isabel beside her. And this time she was fighting back. The drive to Oregon took 7 hours. Alice sat in the passenger seat of David's sedan while Isabel dozed in the back, exhausted from her confrontation with Marcus. The highway stretched north through forests and mountains, each mile putting distance between them and the chaos at Blackwood Estate. Vivian had been clear on the phone. She wouldn't share what she'd found with anyone who might leak it to the media or other claimants. She'd only meet face to face, away from the circus. "You don't have to do this," David said quietly, his eyes on the road. "We could handle the legal aspects without her cooperation. I want to understand what happened. The real story, not just the legal one." Alice watched pine trees blur past. "And I need to know if her claim is legitimate. If I'm fighting to keep something that morally belongs to someone else." David's hands tightened on the wheel. Morality and law don't always align. "I know. That's the problem." They arrived at Vivian's address in Eugene just after sunset. The house was modest. A small ranch-style home with a wheelchair ramp leading to the front door. The yard was meticulously maintained, but the house itself showed signs of deferred maintenance. Peeling paint, a sagging gutter, windows that needed replacing. Vivian answered the door immediately, as if she'd been watching for them. "Mrs. Perkins. Mr. Brennan. Please come in." The interior was cramped but clean, filled with books and photographs. A young man sat in a wheelchair by the window, late 20s, Alice guessed, with Vivian's same dark eyes but a slack expression that suggested severe cognitive disability. "My son, Michael." Vivian's voice softened. "He was born with cerebral palsy. The care costs." She didn't finish the sentence. Alice felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't abstract anymore. This was a mother trying to care for her child. Vivian led them to a dining room table covered with documents protected by archival sleeves. "My life's work," she said simply. 40 years of research into what happened to my family." She pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but preserved. "My grandfather's personal diary, 1928 to 1929. I inherited it from my father, who hid it his entire life out of shame." Alice sat down, David beside her, Isabel peering over her shoulder. Vivian opened the journal to a marked page. The handwriting was elegant, controlled. Alice began reading. "March 15, 1929. The Santoros came again today. Giuseppe says I owe them for the protection they've provided, for the connections that let me sell wine during these dark times. But their price keeps rising. Now they want half the collection, half of everything I've built." Vivian turned pages, guiding them through the story. Nathaniel Blackwood had been a successful vintner before Prohibition, with connections to the finest wine estates in Europe. When Prohibition began, he'd continued operating, not because he was a criminal, but because he believed the law was unjust, destroying an art form. But to move wine, he'd needed criminal connections. The Santoro family. June 3, 1929. They threatened my children today. Not explicitly, but Giuseppe made sure I saw his men watching the house when my daughter walked to school. I understand the message. Pay what they demand or pay in blood. He was being extorted, David said quietly. Yes, and he was terrified. Vivian's voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. So he made a plan. He convinced the Santoros he was hiding his most valuable wines from federal agents, that he needed time to move them safely. What he was really doing was moving them to a place they'd never find. She turned to entries from late 1929. The handwriting became more hurried, desperate. October 12, 1929. The cave is ready. I've moved the bottles, not just mine, but wines I've acquired from estates being destroyed by Prohibition. History that will be lost forever if I don't preserve it. Some I bought legitimately, others I took, saved from destruction, I tell myself. But theft is theft, no matter the justification. Alice looked up. He admits some of the wine was stolen? He was preserving history, but yes, legally theft. Vivian met her eyes. Does that change how you see it? Alice didn't answer. Vivian continued turning pages. October 28, 1929. Giuseppe knows something is wrong. His questions are becoming more pointed. I've told Tomas, the only man I trust, where the cave entrance is hidden. If something happens to me, he'll know what to do. Keep it buried. Keep my family safe. The final entries were brief, chaotic. November 2, 1929. They came tonight, Giuseppe and his brothers, demanding I show them where the wine is hidden. I refused. There was a fight. Guns. In the caves, the sound echoed like thunder. 3 men dead. I sealed the entrance after, trapped their bodies inside. God forgive me. November 5, 1929. The authorities are asking questions. The Santoros are watching. I've told my family we must leave the estate. Tonight. Forever. Better to be poor and alive than wealthy and dead. The journal ended there. Vivian produced another document. A death certificate from 1930. Nathaniel Blackwood. Cause of death. Heart attack. But there were notes in the margin, faded medical observations suggesting poisoning. They killed him anyway, Vivian said. Once he'd abandoned the estate. Once they realized they'd never find the wine. Revenge. The room fell silent except for Michael's quiet breathing by the window. My father was 16 when they fled. He spent his entire life carrying the shame of what his father had done. The violence, the theft, the association with criminals. Our family name was destroyed. He died bitter and broken, convinced the wine collection was lost forever. Vivian's voice cracked. I've been searching for it my whole life. Not for money. For proof that my grandfather wasn't just a criminal. That he was trying to protect something valuable. That our family's legacy meant more than blood and shame. Alice looked at the journal, at the death certificate, at Michael in his wheelchair needing care his mother could barely afford. What are you proposing? She asked quietly. A partnership. You're the legal owner of the property. But the collection represents my family's history. My grandfather's attempt to preserve something beautiful in dark times. Vivian pulled out a formal proposal, typed and notarized. Split the proceeds. 50-50. My share goes to Michael's care and to establishing a proper historical archive documenting what really happened. Your share is yours to keep or donate as you see fit. David leaned forward, reading the proposal. This would actually strengthen Alice's legal position against the other claimants. A settlement with the Blackwood family heir would establish clear provenance and ownership transfer. And Marcus? Alice asked. His claim is predicated on challenging the property purchase. If the wine's ownership is independently established through this agreement, his marital asset argument becomes moot. Isabel spoke for the first time. Mom, she needs this. Look at her house. Look at Michael. This isn't greed. It's survival. Alice studied Vivian's face. The pride fighting with desperation. The dignity maintained despite obvious financial struggle. She thought about Marcus's entitled demands, about Gabriel Santoro's cold eyes, about the fortune that had brought nothing but chaos into her life. I need to think about it, Alice said finally. Not because I doubt your claim, but because I need to understand what I'm agreeing to, what the implications are. Vivian nodded. That's fair. Take the time you need. But Mrs. Perkins, Alice, please understand. This isn't just about money for me. It's about my grandfather's name, my father's wasted life, my son's future. It's about proving that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight costs everything. They left as night fell completely, driving back toward California in silence. Isabel slept in the back seat. David focused on the road. Alice stared out the window, Nathaniel Blackwood's words echoing in her mind. Some things stay buried for a reason, but they weren't buried anymore, and now Alice had to decide what that meant. Not just legally, but morally. What she deserved versus what was right. What peace cost versus what justice demanded. Her phone rang. Jack Reeves. Mrs. Perkins, you need to get back to the estate. Now. What happened? Gabriel Santoro just filed a legal claim. He's arguing that some of the bottles in the collection were stolen from estates his family now owns. Says he's acquired the rights from the original owner's descendants. Jack's voice was tight. It's bullshit, but it's clever bullshit. He's trying to tie everything up in court for years. And Alice, there's more. Someone tried to break into the storage facility tonight. Professional job. They didn't get in, but they came close. Alice closed her eyes. Of course they did. We're 4 hours away. I know. Just wanted you to know what you're driving back to. This is escalating fast. Gabriel doesn't just want the wine. He wants to own you. Pause. Whatever Vivian showed you in Oregon, whatever deal she's offering, consider it carefully. Because choosing allies right now might be the most important decision you make. The line went dead. Alice looked at David, at Isabel sleeping peacefully in the back, at the highway stretching endlessly ahead. She'd wanted to escape Marcus, escape manipulation, escape a life where she had no control. Instead, she'd found a fortune that made her more trapped than ever. But maybe, Alice thought, looking at the proposal from Vivian still in her lap, there was a third option. Not fighting for the fortune, not surrendering it, but choosing what it meant, choosing who deserved it and why. The question was whether she'd survive long enough to make that choice on her own terms. Alice returned to Blackwood Estate at 2 in the morning. The property was lit up like a crime scene, which she supposed it nearly had been. Maria Santos met them at the gate, her expression grim. The storage facility called it in. 2 men, professional gear, tried to breach the climate-controlled vault. Security stopped them, but they got away. Maria walked them toward the house. They knew exactly where the most valuable bottles were stored. Someone with inside information. Raymond, David said flatly. Maybe. Or someone at the transport company. Or any of the dozen people who've been circling this situation. Maria stopped at the porch. Alice, you need to understand something. This isn't about wine anymore. This is about Gabriel Santoro proving he can take whatever he wants. And he has resources you can't match. Inside, Jack Reeves waited in the kitchen, looking exhausted. The legal filing is real. Gabriel's claiming he purchased rights from 3 estates that allegedly had wine stolen during Prohibition. Including bottles he says match descriptions in Nathaniel Blackwood's ledger. Can he prove ownership? David asked. He doesn't have to. Not yet. He just has to create enough legal ambiguity to freeze everything in litigation for years. Meanwhile, he keeps trying to acquire the bottles through other means. Jack pulled up something on his phone. He's also offering $1 million to anyone who can provide him access to the collection. That's public now. Posted on collector forums. Alice felt the room spin slightly. Isabel's hand found hers, steadying her. There's more, Jack continued. Gabriel's made inquiries about purchasing the entire Blackwood estate. Through intermediaries, but the intent is clear. If he owns the property, he owns whatever's on it. The estate's not for sale, Alice said. Everything's for sale at the right price. And Gabriel has the money to make offers people can't refuse. Jack's weathered face showed something like sympathy. I've been doing this work a long time. I've seen collectors like him destroy people who get between them and what they want. He won't stop. Not until he has those bottles or until you're broken enough to give them to him. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alice walked to the window, looking out at the vineyard she'd bought for a fresh start. The vines were still diseased, still dying. She hadn't had time to even begin the work she'd come here to do. We need to make a decision, David said quietly. Fight him legally, which could take years and cost everything you have. Sell him select bottles to satisfy his claim, which sets a precedent that anyone with a creative legal theory can extort you. Or find a different path entirely, Alice finished. A knock at the door made everyone tense. Maria's hand went to her hip, where Alice knew she carried a weapon. Through the window, Alice saw a familiar black Mercedes. Gabriel Santoro. 2:30 in the morning. Don't let him in, Jack warned. But Alice was already moving to the door. David tried to stop her, but she shook her head. If he's going to threaten me, I want to hear it directly. She opened the door. Gabriel stood on her porch in the same expensive suit, looking as fresh as if it were noon. His smile was gone. Mrs. Perkins, we need to talk. It's 2:30 in the morning. Yes, when honest conversations happen, away from lawyers and witnesses and people recording everything for leverage. He gestured to the porch. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Against every instinct, Alice stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her. Through the window, she could see David's alarmed face, Jack moving to intervene. But she needed to understand what she was really dealing with. Gabriel leaned against the porch railing, his posture casual but his eyes sharp. You're in over your head. You know it. I know it. Everyone watching this circus knows it. Is there a point to this? The point is that I'm offering you a way out. $150 million. Half the estimated value. You keep the property, keep your fresh start, walk away wealthy enough to never worry about money again. His voice was reasonable, almost kind. Your legal battles disappear. The threats stop. Your daughter is safe. Everyone wins. Except I lose half the collection. You keep half, which is more than you'll have after years of litigation drain your resources and break your spirit. Gabriel's mask of civility cracked slightly. I've done this before, Alice. I know how it ends. The person who found the treasure always loses. Always. Either to legal fees or theft, or simply the crushing weight of defending something everyone else wants. Or what? You said that's one way it ends. What's the other way? Gabriel's smile returned, cold and sharp. The other way is you refuse my generous offer. You fight, and I make your life a living hell until you have nothing left but the memory of what you could have had. He straightened. I've spent 30 years building my collection. These bottles, the ones your grandfather hid, they're the final pieces. I will have them. The only question is whether you're smart enough to profit from that inevitability. My grandfather? Nathaniel Blackwood didn't hide those bottles. He stole them, including from my great-grandfather's estate in Napa. Family stories passed down just like Vivian's. Except mine come with legal documentation and the resources to prove it in court. Alice's mind raced. You're lying. Am I? Or has Vivian been lying to you, spinning a tragic tale to manipulate your sympathy? Gabriel pulled out his phone, showed her scanned documents. My great-grandfather's inventory from 1928. Wines that match bottles in your cave. I have bills of sale, correspondence, everything I need to prove ownership. Alice looked at the documents. They looked legitimate, but so had Vivian's. 150 million, Gabriel repeated. Deposited in your account within 72 hours. You sign over half the collection to me, we both drop our legal claims, and you get to actually live the life you came here for. He paused. Or you can keep fighting. But understand, I've planned for every contingency, every possible outcome. You cannot win this. You can only choose how much you lose. He walked back to his Mercedes without waiting for an answer. The engine purred to life, and he drove away slowly, deliberately, making sure she watched him leave. Alice stood alone on the porch, shaking, not from fear, from rage, at Gabriel's arrogance, at the impossible situation, at the fortune that had become a curse. The door opened. Tomas stepped out, moving with that silent grace that still startled her. You should know, he said quietly. There's another entrance to the caves. One Nathaniel showed me before he died. He made me promise to never reveal it unless someone tried to steal what he'd hidden. Why are you telling me now? Because that man who just left, his family killed Nathaniel. Poisoned him. I was there. I saw. Tomas's eyes were dark with old pain. And I know where the 3 bodies are buried. The men who died in the caves in 1929. Their bones are still down there. Evidence of murder. Evidence that would destroy Gabriel's legal claim and prove the Santoro family's criminal history. Alice stared at him. You've kept this secret for 40 years? Nathaniel made me swear. Protect the wine. Protect the truth. Wait for someone worthy. Tomas met her eyes. I think maybe that's you. Alice didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table until dawn. Tomas's revelations circling her mind like a predator. Bodies in the caves. Evidence of murder. A secret that could destroy Gabriel Santoro's claim and vindicate Vivian's family. Or drag her into a criminal investigation that would consume everything. When the sun finally rose, she found David asleep on her couch. Isabel curled in a sleeping bag on the floor, both of them having refused to leave her alone. The sight of them, her daughter who'd chosen to stand beside her, the attorney who'd become something more than professional, made Alice's chest tighten. She'd been thinking about this all wrong. Fighting over the fortune, defending her claim, trying to win against people with more resources and fewer scruples. That was Marcus's game. The same game that had destroyed her marriage, that had taught her the only way to survive was to surrender or be crushed. But what if she changed the game entirely? Alice pulled out her laptop and began typing. An email to David, to Vivian, to the California Museum of Wine History, to the Historical Preservation Society. By the time David stirred awake, she drafted a proposal that made her hands shake, but her mind feel clear for the first time in weeks. Alice, what are you doing? David's voice was rough with sleep. Ending this, on my terms. She showed him the screen. His eyes widened as he read, then widened further. You're donating the entire collection? To a consortium of California museums and historical societies, with specific provisions. Alice's voice was steady. Vivian receives a substantial finder's fee for her family's historical documentation, enough to care for Michael and restore the Blackwood name through proper historical preservation. The collection gets displayed with full acknowledgement of its complicated history. Nathaniel Blackwood's story gets told honestly, not as criminal but as complicated. And I walk away. Alice, you'd be giving up $300 million. No, I'd be refusing to let $300 million destroy me. She met his eyes. Marcus's legal claim becomes meaningless. You can't claim marital assets on a charitable donation. Gabriel's threats evaporate. You can't threaten or steal wine that's publicly owned and tracked. The state's claim is satisfied because the collection serves public interest. And I get what I actually came here for. Peace. A chance to rebuild this vineyard without a fortune hanging over my head like a guillotine. David sat back, processing. The tax implications alone would give me significant tax credits. Enough to actually restore this estate properly. And I'd still have the property, still have my fresh start. Just without the target on my back. Isabel woke, listened to Alice explain the plan. Her daughter's eyes filled with tears. You're giving it all away? I'm choosing what matters. The fortune was never mine. Not really. It was Nathaniel Blackwood's desperate attempt to preserve something beautiful. It should stay preserved. Just not in someone's private collection where it becomes another trophy. Alice pulled Isabel close. And I'm choosing you. Your safety. Our relationship. A future that isn't poisoned by greed. The next hours moved with surreal speed. David made calls, drafted documents, contacted the museum consortium. Vivian drove down from Oregon, her face a mixture of disbelief and tears when Alice explained the finder's fee arrangement. You're giving me enough to care for Michael, to document my family's real history, to prove my grandfather wasn't just a criminal. He was complicated, like all of us. His story deserves to be told honestly. By noon, the press release was ready. By 2 p.m. it was public. Alice Perkins was donating the Blackwood collection, valued at $317 million, to California's historical preservation in the largest single wine-related charitable contribution in history. The response was immediate and explosive. Marcus called 17 times. Alice didn't answer. His lawyers sent furious emails about how the donation was a transparent attempt to avoid his legitimate claim. David responded with documentation showing the donation had been planned before any legal challenges, making Marcus's argument moot. Gabriel Santoro appeared at the estate that evening, his sophisticated mask completely gone. He stood on Alice's porch, his face twisted with barely controlled rage. You stupid woman, do you have any idea what you've done? I've taken away your leverage. Your legal claim is worthless now. The bottles are public property. You've made an enemy, a dangerous one. Gabriel's voice dropped to something cold and deadly. I don't forget. I don't forgive. You think donating the collection protects you? You've just guaranteed I'll spend the rest of my life making you regret this decision. Then you'll waste your life, because I'm not afraid of you anymore. Gabriel stared at her for a long moment, searching for the weakness he'd been exploiting. Finding none, he turned and left without another word. Jack Reeves called an hour later. My clients, the collectors who hired me, they're furious. You've made the collection untouchable. They wanted those bottles. I know. They're talking about retaliation. Nothing specific, but... Jack paused. Alice, you should know. I'm done with this case. I don't work for people who threaten civilians. But be careful. Some of these collectors have connections to people who don't care about laws or consequences. The warning should have terrified her. Instead, Alice felt strangely calm. She'd made her choice. Whatever came next, it would be on her terms. Raymond Ashford showed up unannounced, looking frantic. You donated my discovery, without consulting me, without giving me credit for the authentication. The museum consortium is crediting you in all documentation. Your name will be on every display, every publication about the collection. But I could have published first. Made my reputation. You sold information to the highest bidder, Raymond. You compromised the collection's security for money. Credit is more than you deserve. He left sputtering about lawsuits and professional ethics, but Alice knew it was empty bluster. The donation was legal, documented, final. That evening, Sophie arrived with wine from her vineyard and food from the local market. She'd organized a small celebration. Just Sophie, her family, a few neighboring vintners who'd watched the chaos from a distance. The valley's talking, Sophie said, pouring wine, about how you gave away a fortune rather than let it corrupt this place. About how you chose peace over greed. She raised her glass. Welcome to wine country, Alice Perkins. You're officially one of us now. The celebration was small, quiet, genuine. These weren't people celebrating wealth. They were celebrating someone who'd chosen community over conquest, preservation over possession. As the sun set over the diseased vines that Alice would finally have time to restore, she stood with Isabel and David, watching the valley turn gold in the fading light. No regrets, David asked quietly. Alice thought about Marcus's fury, Gabriel's threats, the fortune she'd given away. Then she thought about Isabel beside her, safe. About Vivian's tears of gratitude. About the freedom that came from no longer being a target. No regrets, she said. For the first time in years, I made a choice that was entirely mine. Not what Marcus wanted, not what anyone else expected. Mine. Her phone buzzed one last time. A text from an unknown number. You made powerful enemies today. Watch your back. Alice deleted it without responding. Let them threaten. Let them rage. She'd found something more valuable than $300 million in wine. She'd found herself again. And that, Alice knew, was worth any price. 6 months later, Blackwood Estate looked different. The diseased vines had been removed, replaced with healthy rootstock that Sophie had helped Alice select. The Victorian house still needed work, but the roof was fixed, the windows replaced, the porch no longer sagged. Alice stood in the vineyard at sunset, her hands dirty from planting. Isabel worked beside her, having transferred to UC Davis to study sustainable viticulture. She came home on weekends, calling the estate home now without hesitation. David's car pulled up the driveway. He'd become a regular presence, the lines between professional and personal long since blurred into something neither named but both understood. The museum exhibition opens next week, he said, joining them in the vineyard. Vivian called. She wants you there. Alice nodded. The Blackwood collection had been beautifully displayed. Bottles preserved, history documented honestly. Nathaniel's complicated legacy acknowledged, not sanitized. Vivian had curated the historical documentation, finally restoring her family's name. A truck appeared on the road. Jack Reeves. He climbed out, looking uncomfortable. Gabriel Santoro hasn't forgotten. Stay vigilant. I know, but I'm not afraid anymore. Marcus had published his op-ed, painting himself as the victim. Alice had read it once, felt nothing, and moved on. She returned to planting vines as the sun set gold across the valley. New growth in old soil. The past never fully released its grip, but she'd chosen what to plant in its shadow. Peace, purpose, a life that was finally genuinely hers. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.